always takes a second. All right. Oh, awesome. We're live. All right. Welcome, everybody. So the amazing Gina Jones is here with us today. Gina Jones is a registered dietitian nutritionist specializing in functional medicine. Oh, here comes the second. All right. I got to turn that off. Okay. Gina holds a master's degree in clinical nutrition from Case Western Reserve University. Gina is both academically and professionally trained from Cleveland Clinic Foundation, and she's also an alumni of Cleveland Clinic Center for Functional Medicine. So she has that science and functional medicine background. So I'm really, really excited to dive in today's topic, which is hormonal health and gut health, the connection. And we're going to also be discussing women's health, thyroid, estrogen balance and imbalance, as well as the impact of some popular fad diets such as intermittent fasting and keto. So through Gina's own healing struggles with autoimmune disease, thyroid disease, and food intolerance, Gina has found her passion in practicing functional medicine, and she created her INW Center, where she provides individualized nutrition care. Would you like to share anything else with the audience, Gina, about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here and talk with you today. So a little bit more about me. I'm from Ohio. I live in Cleveland currently. I'm a mom of two little girls. One is 8 and one is 4. So I'm a registered and licensed dietitian. I also own a food company called Crunchy Kitchen, where we sell allergen-friendly wraps and waffles are coming out soon, and currently focusing on helping women heal their thyroid and balance hormones using real food in a functional medicine approach.
I love it. Oh my gosh, that sounds awesome. Great. So I'd love to start with just kind of a very broad question, which how is gut health connected to hormonal health?
Yeah, so your gut plays a huge role into your health overall from a functional medicine perspective. So if you think about your gut health, we have about 70% of our immune system, if not more, housed within our gut. So our gut and our hormone health are very connected, because if your gut is not working properly, there's definitely some hormones that are produced there. So I'll give you an example. For instance, your thyroid, you convert about 20% of your thyroid inactive form T4 to the active form T3 within the gut. So if you don't have the correct gut bacteria, that affects your thyroid hormone. And if your thyroid's not working properly, your thyroid hormones touch every cell in your body. So that can end up affecting not only your thyroid hormones, but that also affects reproductive hormones and cortisol and stress hormones. So it's really kind of wide ranging there. Also blood sugar regulation. So for instance, say that you eat a lot of processed foods or sugar, that can affect your adrenal glands based off of gut bacteria. That means that you may produce more cortisol, which is a hormone that can cause weight gain. So what our gut bacteria and our microbiome is doing is greatly impacting all of our hormones in one way or another.
That was perfect explanation for those who are looking to know and understand that connection. So, and what are some signs that someone may be experiencing hormonal issues or imbalance? Like any common things? I know that's I'm starting really broad and sort of like beginner friendly, but what are some general signs? Because I know there's many different types of hormonal imbalance, so you can kind of attack this question however you see fit.
Sure, yeah, so you're right. There's so many different hormone imbalances, and the symptoms would depend on what that hormone imbalance is. So for instance, if you're experiencing things like acne, weight gain, hair loss, and all of those 3 things together, that might mean that you have androgenic hormones that have kind of like increased over a period of time. Other hormone imbalances related to like menstrual cycle could be headaches, irregular periods, bloating, fatigued, dry skin, infertility, endometriosis. It's very wide ranging. Even anxiety and brain fog can be a part of that too.
Mm-hmm. And so what do you think are some of the biggest contributing factors to hormonal imbalance?
Yeah. So from a functional medicine perspective, we like to look at things from a whole body perspective. And typically I notice that diet is a huge impact. So as a dietitian, seeing high processed food diets, high sugar food diets, foods like, and I know we'll get into this a little bit later, but foods like dairy that may not be as high of quality can also play an impact in hormones. And from a non-food perspective, stress, environment, thyroid disease, even taking birth control, which I talk about on my feed sometimes, those can all play a role into what types of hormone imbalances somebody might be experiencing.
Sure. And I'm sure people are maybe thinking now, since you mentioned birth control, let's talk about that. So what are your thoughts, or how can that impact our hormones?
Right. So birth control, typically, there's a lot of side effects to it. And a lot of the patients that I have, their first kind of signal to go on it is hormone imbalances. So for instance, if they're experiencing irregular periods or PMS and bloating, their doctor will typically prescribe that they go on a hormonal birth control. So when I'm talking birth control, specifically like the pill, and that can affect your hormones. So somebody might think that they're having a regular period, but they're not actually having a normal regular period. It's just a symptom, almost like what they call like a phantom period, like using birth control, because it's going to kind of regulate your cycle in that sense. But as soon as you get off of it, you're going to be symptomatic again. So it has a lot of side effects as far as decreasing your nutrients. So it blocks things like zinc, which is really important for hormone balance and thyroid. So I'm not a huge fan of hormonal birth control. The copper, like IUD, is a great conventional or traditional medicine source for birth control that is non-hormonal. So if my patients want something like that, I normally gear them towards something that is not hormonal.
Right. And I think it's important to note, like, with that said, there are people that may need to be on some sort of birth control if it's quality of life thing, like they're having pain with some sort of issue, or if other methods won't work for them. Sometimes that is one case where people may need to be on it, but it's important to note that it's not like a Band-Aid if you're not having a period, or if your period is irregular. It doesn't cause a natural cycle. It just sort of causes that withdrawal bleed.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that if you are experiencing issues with your cycle at all, that's typically a symptom that our body is like, hey, wake up, listen to me, there's something going on. And a lot of the time, like you said, we try to put a Band-Aid on it and try to ignore it, where there's something deeper going on. So that might relate to maybe our progesterone is too low, maybe estrogen's too high, and we need to balance those things to actually help with pain and period. So definitely looking to exhaust some other factors first before doing that would be beneficial for most people.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And that leads us to our next sort of conversation topic, which I really think is fascinating, which is estrogen balance, because I've heard about having different symptoms from estrogen dominance or too low estrogen. So maybe we can talk about both and how they show up.
Yeah, so I would say high estrogen is probably most common with symptoms compared to low estrogen levels. Related to like gut health and symptoms, it can be anything from like PMS to breast tenderness to fatigue and hot flashes. So it's really wide ranging. And the low estrogen and high estrogen symptoms look very similar. So it's hard to kind of tell the difference between them. However, related to gut health aspect of it, there's definitely ways of detoxing your estrogen. So for instance, if you have high estrogen levels and your body is not having a bowel movement every day, that's one of the main ways that we get the estrogen out of our system. So a lot of people that are constipated or not going to the bathroom every day tend to have higher estrogen levels or show higher estrogen levels and can show symptoms of that. So once again, there's that like gut and hormone connection, and something to dig deeper into for sure if they're experiencing that.
Yes. And from my understanding, that's when hydration, fiber, making sure that you have a balanced diet to help you find that rhythm to like properly evacuate and eliminate is really important to get rid of the excess waste and excess hormones. And I had another thought. Oh, and then on the other end, low estrogen, what are some lifestyle factors that might cause that?
Low estrogen age can definitely increase or decrease your estrogen levels. Stress, there's a few things that can play a role into that as well. Other hormones being out of balance, so progesterone, like the balance between progesterone and estrogen as well. So if progesterone's too high, sometimes estrogen kind of dips. So that can show up in several different ways too.
What about the diet component? Do you see people often in your practice like under fueling or maybe with an eating disorder? In that case, is that someone that would commonly have low estrogen?
That can happen. I don't see a lot of clients that have, eating disorders in my current practice. I focus mostly on thyroid and hormone health with autoimmune disease. But yeah, absolutely. If you're under fueling, if you're not taking in the right amount of calories, I just had this conversation with somebody today, actually. If you're not eating enough calories, especially when doctors are having you lose weight and they put you on really restrictive diets and things like that, your hormones can absolutely dip to the point where you're not producing enough.
Mm-hmm. Is that the case for the thyroid as well?
As far as calories?
Yes, as far as like a restrictive diet. Is the thyroid impacted by that or?
The thyroid can be impacted by low diet or low calories from a diet. However, there's some caveats there because if it's hypothyroidism versus like an autoimmune thyroiditis, you're going to have some differences in what is good for your body and what is not necessarily the best for your body as far as inflammatory factors. So, and especially too, and this might be a little bit off topic, but when we talk about thyroid disease, constipation typically goes hand in hand with thyroid disease. And that can lead to other hormone imbalances. So if you are constipated, you might not be eating enough calories because you're not able to have a normal daily bowel movement, which can once again affect your thyroid hormones too. So it's all kind of like a circular, ties in together.
It is very connected, which is why I was really looking forward to this conversation. And constipation is something I'm always talking about because it's such a root cause of acid reflux, bloating and cramping. It's often overlooked. And even if you go to the bathroom every day, like you can still be constipated. It's so important to know, like notice if you feel like you're having that effective evacuation because they can build up for sure. And so a registered dietitian like Gina can help you kind of figure out a plan that will help you release some of that waste. But I think it really comes down to like, if we were thinking about like some tips for constipation, what would be like your top tips?
Yeah, and once again, it's going to depend on the individual person, but making sure that you're staying hydrated. So typically the rule of thumb is about half of your body weight in ounces each day. Give or take a little bit depending on exercise and other factors, of course, making sure you're eating enough fiber and vegetables. If you are, movement, so daily exercise, some type of daily movement to get the bowels kind of like going. In a pinch, like if someone's chronically constipated and we can't figure out what the root cause is yet, magnesium or a tea that maybe has some magnesium in it or foods that have magnesium in it can be really helpful to just start the process going. And that seems to be very beneficial for most people that need it. However, I don't like to do that long term. I like for people to get the bowel movements going so they're more comfortable and then work towards what is the root cause. Like, is it an infection? Is it a motility issue? And then as you dig deeper into that, then you can adjust accordingly and not be on supplements long term.
So I'd love to segue to the thyroid. I don't know a lot about the thyroid. I know a little bit, just what we learn in dietetics undergrad and human physiology, but can we talk about that and like any connection it might have to gut health and how we can best take care of it?
Yeah, so your thyroid and your gut, like I said, are very connected. One example I gave a little bit ago was how you convert about 20% of your thyroid hormone into the active thyroid hormone in your gut. So that is one way, like one main connection. Some other connections there are dysbiosis. So I mentioned before on one of my Instagram posts that 54% of people with hypothyroidism have SIBO, which is small intestinal bacteria overgrowth, for anyone that doesn't know. And it's really just an overgrowth of bad bacteria in the intestinal system. And that typically comes from constipation. And so if you have slow motility or constipation, and it's kind of like which came first, as a chicken or the egg type of scenario. So did the hypothyroidism come first, or did the constipation come first that created the SIBO? But that is very connected, because once you have SIBO, that can lead to Hashimoto's or hypothyroidism if it's not treated properly. Another way is inflammation. So if you're eating Hashimoto's, once again, a thyroid disorder tends to be very correlated with celiac disease. A lot of Hashimoto's and thyroid patients are either celiac diagnosed or non-celiac gluten sensitive. So if you're eating foods that are inflammatory for your body, then your gut's going to be inflamed. It's not going to absorb your nutrients as well. So things like selenium and zinc and vitamin D and all these things that we need for our proper thyroid function are not going to be absorbed properly. And that can lead to thyroid disorders as well.
Mm-hmm. So for people that may not be as familiar with hypothyroidism, what are the indicators of hypothyroidism? How would you know you had it, and what would you do if you feel like you have the symptoms? Yeah,
so hypothyroidism, similar to the other symptoms of other hormone issues, would be things like fatigue, like just feeling like extremely exhausted, cold or heat intolerances, brain fog, gut issues where you feel bloated or constipated again. It's very wide ranging. So it's going to look similar to hormone disease or hormone issues, and can be, they're going to mimic each other. So if you think that you might be having it, ask your doctor to check your thyroid levels, especially it's very common in postpartum and pregnancy. So making sure that you're getting those levels checked. Not all doctors do that for sure. If you are having trouble losing weight and are also having problems with digestion, skin issues, acne, anxiety, and it's not going away with diet changes or not going away with lifestyle changes, that would be another indicator to get your thyroid checked as well.
So I think I know my doctor, I just have a traditional doctor. They normally test TSH, so it's thyroid stimulating hormone, and free T4.
Yes.
So I think they only check 2 thyroid hormones in the physical. Is that good? Is that indicative? Will that show people if there's an imbalance, or should they push for more tests of the thyroid to see if they have an imbalance?
I think it depends. So typically if you have, or if you suspect a thyroid issue, I like to see a full thyroid panel, not just TSH and T4. The reason being is because antibodies, so when we're talking about the autoimmune version of a thyroid disease, your antibodies are what attacks your thyroid gland and causes it to not work as optimally. So it actually degrades the thyroid. In that scenario, antibodies can show up about 7 years before your TSH level is abnormal. So if we're not regularly checking these things, you can do a lot of damage to your thyroid if you're just checking TSH once a year or once every few years. So I personally have Hashimoto's as well. And I know that I never had a TSH level, an antibody level drawn until I was 26 years old and I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's. And it was only because my symptoms were so severe. So I'm really a big advocate of making sure that we get those thyroid levels checked. So you might be wondering what the labs are. Okay, so the TSH is a great starting point, but then you would want to have the antibodies drawn. So there's 2 different antibodies. There's TPO antibodies and then thyroglobulin antibodies. And then you would have your free T3, free T3, reverse T3, free T4, total T4, and then your TSH. So it's kind of, there's a set of labs that would go with your thyroid, and that gives you a lot of information to tell you maybe you're producing enough TSH, but you're not converting it well to T4, or you're not converting your T4 to T3. that can give you a lot of information on what's going on too.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And is Hashimoto's another name for hypothyroidism, or is it a different form of hypothyroidism?
It's a different form of hypothyroidism. So technically Hashimoto's is hypothyroidism. And the difference would be hypothyroidism, you are going to have a low TSH or a high TSH, and a low T4. In Hashimoto's, you same thing, same numbers, but you have those antibodies. So when you have regular hypothyroidism, you don't have active antibodies typically, which means that your own body is not attacking your thyroid. When you have Hashimoto's, your immune system is upregulated and it creates antibodies to your thyroid, and it attacks your thyroid to help kill off the thyroid because it looks at it like an invader. So it's almost like a situation where it's a foreign substance and your immune system's trying to attack it to get it out or to get it to go away.
Mm. So for anyone who's looking to support their thyroid health, or maybe they have hypothyroidism in their family, what can we do to support that?
Yeah. So if you have a family history of Hashimoto's or autoimmune disease in general, I normally want you to focus on a very whole food based diet. So limiting processed foods, limiting really high sugar, not saying you can't ever eat those, but just being aware of how much or the types of foods that you eat. So making sure that you are supporting your gut health by reducing those inflammatory foods and increasing gut healthy foods. So things like fiber, broth, so vegetable broth, bone broth, collagen peptides are a great one for your gut health, and ghee even. So if you're familiar with ghee, it's the clarified butter. That actually has something in it called butyrate, which can help heal and seal the lining of your intestines. And that can help reduce your risk of developing an autoimmune disease later, or even thyroid disease. So that helps keep everything intact as far as not having constipation, not developing SIBO, and eventually not developing hypothyroidism either, hopefully.
And you mentioned wheat or gluten intolerance, and I'm curious about that. What is the mechanism there? Like, why are people with hypothyroidism often so sensitive to gluten?
So it's through something called molecular mimicry, where the actual protein in gluten looks very similar to the thyroid gland cells. So when you eat gluten, your body is attacking it. And that's why a lot of Hashimoto's people are celiac disease, because they look so similar. And then once you stop eating the gluten, that can reduce your inflammation, but then your body kind of makes a mistake and views your thyroid cells as gluten and continues to attack it. So through that molecular mimicry, it's attacking both. So when you reduce gluten or eliminate gluten, then your body is not as on guard and is not attacking your thyroid as much.
Interesting. So you mentioned a whole food, plant-based diet, proper evacuation, stress management. What are some non-food related ways that we can support hormone balance and thyroid health?
Great question. Stress is a huge one. So when we have too much stress, cortisol can get out of balance, estrogen, progesterone, many of and even other metabolites can go out of balance. We have more hormones than just the reproductive ones, but those are just the most common. So decreasing stress actually has been shown in research to help across the board with hormones. So aiming for 20 minutes a day of just stress management techniques, whether that's journaling or coloring or meditation, whatever you like, can really help to balance hormones. We talked about exercise a little bit. We talked about the evacuation, like you said. Sleep is another big one. So making sure that you're getting adequate sleep at night. Adults should be somewhere around 7 to 9 hours typically, and good restful sleep. So making sure you're not on your phones and just doing good sleep hygiene could really help with that too. And actually a really interesting one is with progesterone. So typically women, as you age over the age of 35, our progesterone dips. And something that's really cool in a study showed that positive self-talk, so doing like self-talk, self-affirmations, actually increased progesterone higher than even some supplements. So just having that positive self-talk daily around anything you're doing can actually increase your progesterone and your feel-good hormones too.
For sure. If anyone's listening is interested more about like the gut-brain connection, I have a really interesting interview with another amazing registered dietitian about that connection and the importance of your mindset and the way that our thoughts and our stress can impact our gut. And I also have lots of meditations and breathing exercises on my page for anyone that's looking to utilize those techniques that can be really, really helpful. So exercise, I've heard things that high intensity exercise may not be good, but I've also heard that for people who have hypothyroidism or maybe postmenopausal, they need to be doing high intensity training if they are trying to lose weight. So there's conflicting messages. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. So when it comes to high intensity exercises with autoimmune disease, that typically can worsen thyroid levels. So there's a lot of research, and I like to gear my patients towards moderate exercise. So if you're going to do HIIT exercises, make that not your main thing. So maybe do HIIT along with some yoga, along with some walking, and kind of have it sprinkled throughout. Weightlifting in general can be really helpful for hypothyroid patients because vitamin D levels typically are low, which can contribute to osteopenia and osteoporosis and different things down the line. So making sure that you're strengthening lean muscle and bone mass can be very helpful. But overall, research points to, especially with hypothyroidism and thyroid disease, moderate intensity for an activity level over something like HIIT.
That makes sense. And as far as if you were trying to help someone who maybe was like weight loss resistant, or they have, and of course, like within the appropriate setting, like not someone who is trying to lose weight, who is underweight or is struggling with an eating disorder, but somebody who is maybe postmenopausal, trying to lose weight and having trouble. Maybe they have hypothyroidism or maybe some other hormonal imbalances. Do you have any recommendations there?
Typically, I would ask for a hormone test because it's really important to know which hormones are elevated or depleted so that we can nurture that end. I do like to use something from like a nutrition end called seed cycling, and seed cycling can be helpful because if you're not familiar with seed cycling, basically the first half of your cycle, or if you don't have a cycle, you can start with the full moon typically. So there's some, it's kind of like, science-based and woo-woo based at the same time, but you can do estrogen in producing seeds like flax and pumpkin. And then you do that for the first 14 days. And then the second 14 days, you would do progesterone boosting seeds, which includes sesame and sunflower. So that could be one way to help someone like regulate the symptoms, even if they are postmenopausal, that can help regulate hormones. The other thing that you would want to do is, once again, going back to gut health and make sure everything is working there. If you have dysbiosis, there's certain gut bacteria that can lead to inability to lose weight. So knowing what your gut bacteria is doing is really important. So maybe after a gut test, looking into probiotics or, repleting nutrients that may be deficient in. So kind of nurturing them more on a side of what is going on individually for them.
What kind of gut tests do you utilize, if ever?
I use a couple different ones. There's one I like through Genova Diagnostics, which is a GI effects test, and it's very comprehensive. It's about 10 to 13 pages worth of information, and you're getting information on, is there inflammation in the gut, which can definitely relate to inability to lose weight. It checks your microbiome. So what is the bad and good bacteria doing in your system? It also checks like metabolic imbalances, yeast, candida, parasites, H. pylori. So there's a whole gamut that it checks, which is really nice. Other ones that I like to use is like GI map, if you're familiar with that one. So there's a couple that I use depending on a few different factors.
Okay, great.
Mhm.
So now I'd love to go into, I'm going to pepper you with all of these topics, and,
Okay.
and not like a speed round, like you have to rush by any means, but I'm just
Sure.
going to say a word, and then you can say either like 1 to 2 insights or how it impacts hormones, anything that you want to share regarding that. Because I think there's lots of different topics that people are interested in how it impacts hormones. So
Yeah.
if it's okay with you, I'm just going to name a couple topics and then
Sure.
okay.
Sure.
First one is alcohol.
Okay, so alcohol I would suggest limiting alcohol for most people. For women specifically, more than 3 drinks per week, there's a lot of research to show that it's correlated with female cancers. So reducing that. Alcohol is probably one of the biggest things that I see in my practice that affects hormones, because especially during COVID, we've gotten into the habit of drinking more and having wine all the time. So really watching how much you're drinking and limiting it, especially for women, to under 3 drinks per week.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned this one already, but I'd love to touch on it again. Dairy. So you mentioned like the quality of the dairy, but how does that play with our hormones?
So dairy, if it's conventional dairy, there's hormones that are in dairy products just because of the way that it's produced and the animals that it comes from. That, not for everybody, but for some people, that can affect your hormones. So it can increase your estrogen levels, especially if you eat a lot of dairy. So for anyone that wants to continue eating dairy, if they're not sensitive to it, I just have them gear them more towards high quality dairy. So things like grass fed, organic, it comes from high quality cows. Sheep and goat milk products are actually more easily digested by our system because the curd size is smaller and the amount of whey and casein is less compared to cow's milk. So if you are going to eat dairy, I would just say keep it limited throughout the week, keep it high quality, and you should be okay as long as there's a true sensitivity there.
I always wonder that about goat cheese because I always find it easier to tolerate, and I love it. And I never knew why. I knew it had to do with the casein in the whey, but I didn't also know about the curd size. So that's really interesting.
Yes. That's why for like even babies, which I know is a little off topic, but babies will get goat's milk before cow's milk and they'll tolerate it better because the curd size is smaller and more digestible.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So this is another broad topic, but a regular period, maybe you could talk about like long cycle, short cycle, stuff like that.
Yeah, so I think there's a range of what's normal for a cycle, and your normal might be different than someone else's normal. So if it varies greatly, or if you're having super short cycles, like 14 days or something like that, we would want to dig in deeper to what the hormones are doing for sure. Longer cycles can still be normal as well, just depending on what that person's normal is. So it's not necessarily reason to be concerned. You just want to kind of like pay attention. But if it goes from 28 days all of a sudden to 42 days, that's when we would want to kind of like take a peek under what's going on. But your regular periods overall, if you're having long cycles or missed periods, I would say make sure you're eating enough calories, because a lot of times if you're over exercising, not eating enough, a lot of women can experience missing their period or having super long cycles from that. And, maybe looking into hormone testing and make sure that you're nourishing your body correctly. Same thing with shorter periods. That might be a reason to look into inflammatory processes. So things like endometriosis or an autoimmune disease, especially if they're super short. But otherwise, if it's normal for you, it's okay. Just make sure that you're nourishing your body correctly.
Mm-hmm. What about intermittent fasting?
I like intermittent fasting for some people. So it's not a across the board thing. Intermittent fasting can be problematic for people that don't have great blood sugar regulation. So right off the bat, I've had a client and many patients that have wanted to do intermittent fasting, but they weren't used to it. So it ends up being like they wake up and they feel shaky or they need to eat. So if you're not doing it correctly, it can be problematic. A lot of people think too that if you just miss your first meal, then you're good to go, but you still need to get all your calories and nutrients and vitamins and minerals in throughout the day. So the basis around intermittent fasting is really just you have an eating window and you have a resting window for your digestive system. which most of us do naturally anyway. So we probably have anywhere between 8 and 10 hours a day where we eat. And then overnight when we're sleeping, we're not eating. And that's when our digestive system can kind of catch up. For people with thyroid issues, I tend to notice they don't do as well with intermittent fasting because they're either back ending all of their calories or not getting enough calories in, and they'll start to see more hypothyroidism symptoms. So it is good for people, like if you want to try to do a little bit of weight loss and do it once or twice a week, but making sure you're still getting in your calories and your nutrients, I'm okay with that. But it's definitely not for everybody.
Mm-hmm. What about low carbohydrate diets?
Once again, it's one of those things that it depends. Overall, you don't necessarily need to be low carb diets. Those are very specific. So, you know, eating lower carbs as long as you're eating more vegetables. So I think it's more about the type of carbs that we talk about when it's low carb diets or not. Most people probably don't need to be necessarily on a low carb diet, but I would advocate for a low processed sugar diet, right? So it depends on the way that you're looking at it. Low carb diets can be helpful if you're having issues with blood sugar regulation, or if you're having issues with like abdominal region, belly fat, things like that. That can be really helpful because that means that your cortisol levels are out of whack. But overall, I think that if you're a healthy person, just have a thyroid disorder that you need to work on, you don't necessarily need to be low carb. And specifically with hormone disorders, especially hypothyroidism, I notice that my patients do better eating carbohydrates. So not doing super low carb, especially if you're exercising and other things. So there's a lot that goes into it.
Mm-hmm. For sure, for sure. Eczema is a question that I get really frequently. And I actually have eczema, but I don't know the relationship to hormonal health. So is there anything that you've seen success with or any wisdom there that you can share?
Yeah, so eczema, I think, relates more to gut health than necessarily just hormone health. Yeah. It's an inflammatory process. You know, some people classify it as an autoimmune disease as well. Things that I would look into there with eczema would be, you know, food allergies, making sure that your zinc levels are adequate, actually, because zinc and vitamin A are going to relate directly to your skin health, making sure your omega-3 fatty acids are where they need to be. So are you eating fish? Are you eating chia seeds? All those types of things. So really helping with your skin barrier. If it's very bad and inflammatory, it could relate to hormone health, but I think it would stem from the gut health correlation.
Makes total sense. As far as supplements, are there any supplements that you often recommend? And I also want to know about omega-3s. So like if someone doesn't eat fish, is that one you would recommend?
Yeah. So I think if someone, let's start with omega-3 since you mentioned that one, but like if someone is allergic or sensitive to fish, you could do like a flaxseed oil or a vegetarian form. There's even like seaweed omega-3s now. So I would definitely recommend some type of either fish oil or omega-3 supplement, because omega-3s actually help to reduce your inflammation overall. So that can help, once again, with skin barriers. It can help with your overall skin health, but also reducing overall inflammation. So if you ran a gut test and saw that you had inflammation in your gut, fish oil can help with that, because you're going to kind of calm down the things that are not working properly there. So omega-3s for sure. The supplements I normally recommend, most people need a vitamin D with a K2, just because if we live in America, we're not getting a lot of sun typically. So a vitamin D is normally needed, a probiotic is normally needed, or eating fermented foods. Most of the time a multivitamin, but not always. And then the omega-3s. When it comes to hormones, I like Vitex or like a chasteberry. It's something that's like natural that you can use to help regulate your hormones if you're having issues. But of course, it's a supplement, so you would want to consult somebody that's aware of your health. And also, like, adaptogens can be really good. So I mentioned how stress affects a lot of your hormones. So if you're somebody that's just normally like high stress, high anxiety, either eating something that has adaptogens in it, like the adaptogen teas or blends, or taking a supplement that has adaptogens in it, can be really helpful to manage not only cortisol levels, but overall stress levels and help you feel calmer too. So those are a few that are kind of top of mind for me.
What are your favorite adaptogens?
I like ashwagandha because you can find it like in the single form most of the time. Reishi mushroom is great. There's a couple others, but I would stick typically with ashwagandha. Or cortisol manager, which is a supplement, has a nice blend of, I think, like 3 or 4 of them, which is a good one too.
And who makes the cortisol manager?
So there's 2. There's one called Cortisol Manager and one called Cortisol Calm, and I might mix them up. But there's Pure Encapsulation makes one, and I believe Orthomolecular makes the other one. But I might need to double check that one.
Oh yeah, no worries. Are those 2 brands that you like, Pure Encapsulations? Yeah. And what was the other one?
Pure Encapsulations, Orthomolecular. I also really like Claire Labs for anyone that has a lot of sensitivities or issues. They're always top 8 allergen free. So I like to use like high quality medical grade brands, ones that are third party tested and very high quality.
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for letting me ask you all of these questions. This was really, really informative, and I'm sure it's going to be really helpful for our listeners. So thank you again.
Thank you for having me.
Where can people find more of you if they want to learn more about you or your practice?
So I'm on Instagram. My handle on Instagram is at Gina Jones RDN. My website is inwcenter.com. And I have a free 3-part little mini course out for people that have a thyroid issue. So that'll be back up on my Instagram page later today as well.
Awesome. I will post that down below in the description box for our listeners. But thank you again. This was awesome. It was great to have you on.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.